When it's the stuff of Hollywood movies or big budget TV series, we have a remarkable fascination with prison breaks. When they take place in the southwest of London and involve a former soldier awaiting trial on terrorism and Official Secrets Act offences, well, that fascination can pretty quickly turn to fear. At the time of recording, Daniel Khalife remains on the run from Wandsworth Prison, accused of leaving fake bombs at a military base and gathering information that could be useful to an enemy state. He's thought to have escaped whilst working in the kitchen by strapping himself to the underside of a delivery van. A nationwide police search is underway, with delays at ports, motorways and airports as a result. By the time you hear this, he may very well be back in custody. But alongside that manhunt, almost as much attention is being given to HMP Wandsworth itself. It has huge issues with both overcrowding and understaffing, as evidenced by a report 2 years ago by the Chief Inspector of Prisons, Charlie Taylor. Built in the mid-19th century, this Category B prison houses cheek by jowl those awaiting trial or sentencing in local courts, and others who are classed high security or have lengthy sentences. But those awaiting trial on terrorism offences would more often be found in a Category A prison, not working in a prison kitchen with access to knives and tools in a Category B.
I've ordered an investigation into the categorization decision by HMPPS. Were all relevant matters taken into consideration in determining where in the custodial estate Daniel Khalife should be held? In both cases, I've asked for the preliminary findings to be with me by the end of this week, and an assessment will be made then about what can properly be put into the public domain. I have also decided there will need to be an additional independent investigation into this incident, and that will take place in due course.
The Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, could not directly address many of the public's concerns when speaking in the Commons midday Thursday, a point noted by his opposite number, Labour's Shabana Mahmood.
This is an extremely serious matter, and it has highlighted catastrophic and multiple failures, not just in respect of this case, but of our wider criminal justice system. It simply beggars belief that a man being held on suspected terror charges was able to escape a prison by clinging to the bottom of a food delivery van. The simplest question for the Justice Secretary today is how on earth was this allowed to happen?
With 2 investigations as well as 2 reviews now underway, answers to the more obvious questions may well be found. At the time of recording, Daniel Khalife has not. I'm Niall Paterson. This is the Sky News Daily. OK, so let's try and understand a little bit better what's been going on at HMP Wandsworth. David Shipley was convicted of fraud and was an inmate at Wandsworth. He now writes and lectures on prisons following his experiences. John Podmore was a prison governor at Belmarsh, Brixton and Swaleside. He was then a prisons inspector and is now a professor of applied social sciences at Durham University. David, to you first. Take us to that first day that you wandered into Wandsworth, Nick, as some people call it. What was it like?
I think my first impression was of complete chaos. When I got off the sweat box, the bus that transports you from the court to the prison, came to the reception area. There was a front desk, and there's a couple of sort of perspex boxes, essentially, which they had filled with men who were due to be released or who were waiting to be assigned to a wing. And there was noise, there was confusion, there was a lot of waiting around, a great deal of disorder. And I think those themes of kind of chaos, disorder and disorganization only got cemented and confirmed for me in the months ahead.
David, when you say chaos, I'm wondering whether that is directly linked to the 2 problems that people most associate with the prison estate these days, overcrowding and understaffing. I
think it absolutely is. In my time at Wandsworth, the prison often couldn't run what they call the basic regime. So this is the idea that prisoners should be fed some food every day and have an opportunity to have a shower, to get outside, to have a little bit of exercise, and to have their cell door open for a period of time so they can clean their cell. And it was very regular that we would have to choose between those options. So, on a given day, they might say, well, you can have a shower or you can have some exercise, but we haven't got time for both. And this was because there was understaffing. Staff were often called away to other wings to deal with issues. And this I think that's a huge contributing factor to these kinds of problems like his escape. The other issue with Wandsworth in particular, constantly churning overpopulated prison, with about 1,550 prisoners there as of the last MOJ data. And I think this, combined with the understaffing, means often prison officers don't really know the men in their charge by face and by name. They're not necessarily clear on who should be on what wing or in what cell. And certainly when I was at Wandsworth, it regularly happened, the prison lockdown, because they had lost track of a prisoner who would, invariably turn out to be in a different cell on another wing, had been released and no one had bothered to record that. So the whole prison struggles because of those issues.
Let's bring in John Podmore at this point. And John, of course, you having been a prison inspector and a prison governor, is it wrong, as is happening at the moment, and of course as we're recording, Daniel Khalife does remain on the run, but is it wrong that people are associating that which David was describing there, the understaffing, the underskilling perhaps of some of the prison officers, and his escape from HMP Wandsworth?
You can't divorce the two. I endorse everything David has said. But I think things have got worse, if that's possible to get worse. I mean, Wandsworth is an old Victorian dilapidated jail. You also add to that the kind of genius idea that was had about 7 or 8 years ago, when the prison service had to save money, as most public bodies did. He thought, well, we'll sack all the expensive, experienced staff, and that'll all be fine. Well, it wasn't. They reluctantly had to recruit new staff. So the experience levels have gone, and something like 50-60% of the staff have got less than 3 years experience. And if they do have to engage with difficult, angry prisoners, many of them are turning around and saying, well, that's not a job I want. But the problems at Wandsworth in the past, and certainly the problems today with the escape, are a reflection of a wider malaise in the prison service, and the prison service is in absolute crisis. And I'm glad that Charlie Taylor has agreed to having an independent inquiry, because another function of the prison system, it's very insular, it's very secretive, it's not open to debate and discussion. It sort of does things in its own way, and it's not been challenged enough. It'll never get more money. It'll never reduce the prison population overnight. But leadership and management is something we need to talk much more about.
John, let's focus very specifically on that which we know about the escape of Daniel Khalife. And we've been hearing, of course, from the Justice Secretary, a delivery van to the prison kitchens, strapping discovered underneath, suggesting that was how he made his way out. I mean, first, John, is that possible? And second, what level of security, I was about to say mess up or something slightly stronger, but what sort of security breach does that represent in a prison such as Wandsworth?
Well, at best it's a giant cock-up. At worst, there's some form of collusion. I mean, there are three issues here with this escape. I mean, one is, should he have been held at Wandsworth? Now, he's not convicted. He's not guilty of anything at the moment.
But he is charged with terrorism offences.
He's charged with terrorism offences, and the courts have decided that to protect the public, he should be held on remand. Now, in my view, he should have been held at Belmarsh. I ran Belmarsh. I dealt with terrorist offenders, people charged with terrorist offences. I know the Cat system well. And he should have been held there.
None of which is to say that we don't get very, very dangerous prisoners locked up inside Wandsworth, of course.
Oh, no, absolutely. But as far as Wandsworth goes, yes, the security issues in terms of getting out under a van, it used to happen in the 80s. But, these days, that van would have gone through an airlock, whereby the van would go in, on the way in and on the way out. And it would be searched underneath with mirrors, searched on top with mirrors. People will go inside it. And that's kind of bog standard routine security. So it clearly didn't happen. Now, whether that was because there was young, inexperienced staff running from pillar to post, whether they were new to the job, hadn't been trained properly, being poorly supervised, the inquiry will find out. But a bigger issue for me, and I'm sure David will have a view on this, is it's very, very unusual for a remand prisoner to be working in the kitchen. Employment in prisons is very hard to come by at the moment. Many prisoners are idle.
Just to clear something up, there is no rule against a prisoner on remand having a job in the prison kitchen. I mean, my initial understanding was you didn't get those jobs unless you were the other side of conviction.
Prisoners on remand can and should work, and they should be given the opportunity to work. This man had been on remand for a year. It is possible to do, but it is exceptionally rare. As you say, it is usually for convicted prisoners. But when there are jobs to be filled, the prison will look to fill them. But by and large, it would be about sentenced and convicted prisoners, because once they're sentenced and convicted, you know a lot more about them. It is extraordinary that he found himself or orchestrated his way into that kind of employment. And that's a major question for the inquiry.
We will pause there. In just a moment, we'll continue to examine how someone awaiting trial on terrorism offences could make his escape from a prison kitchen. That's next. And we're continuing to examine that escape from Wandsworth Prison with David Shipley, a former Wandsworth inmate turned writer, and John Podmore, a former governor and prisons inspector. It is not yet known exactly how Daniel Khalife was able to escape, but the working assumption is he did so under a van making a delivery to the kitchen where he worked. David, from your experience as an inmate at Wandsworth, how often did you see people who were on remand not just working, but perhaps working in place where, let's be honest, you have access to weapons, you have access to knives, you have access to items that can be easily turned into weapons?
I think actually, in my experience, my time in Wandsworth, as COVID kicked in and periods on remand lengthened, the prison did actually switch to giving quite a lot of jobs to men who were on remand. I think the reality just was that you had people who'd been there for 6, 9, 12 more months on remand, and it was unsustainable to keep saying you can't have a job. The strange thing, I agree with John on this though, is that there are probably 2 jobs in Wandsworth where you have a reasonable level of access to outside. It seems very strange that a prisoner who was considered a flight risk would be working in the kitchen at all. And as John said, those jobs are very hard to come by. They're really in demand. The kitchen job is probably the most desirable one in Wandsworth. You get as much good food as you want. You can probably take extra food to trade. You get out of the cell all day. So it's a high status job amongst prisoners. And Wandsworth has to explain how this guy, got into that job, and then how there was a complete failure to actually check the lorry on the way out.
Was escape something that those who worked in the kitchens in your time there, was that something they even considered or talked about? I imagine if they talked about it, they didn't talk about it widely.
Most prisoners, I think, are probably not interested in escaping, because fundamentally, if you do escape, you are going to be caught almost certainly very quickly, and then you're just going to have to do the rest of your sentence, probably plus some extra time, in a higher security prison. You'll never have any chance of going near an open prison. There's not really a lot of upside. If you have some means of fleeing the country or loads of wealth so you can disappear, perhaps. But I think for most prisoners, escape isn't particularly appealing, because it does carry a lot of consequences, and the chances of success for any period of time are pretty low.
John, I'd suggest that part of the reason that there has been so much media public attention on this is because, of course, Daniel Khalife is accused of terrorism-related offences. We've been hearing from the Justice Secretary today about the investigations that will be taking place inside HMP Wandsworth itself, but he's also asked for a review of the categorisation and placement of everyone held in Wandsworth, which I understand, but also for the location of all those on the prison estate charged with terrorism offences. What should we read into that? That perhaps that there are people awaiting trial, or perhaps even convicted of very significant offences relating to terrorism, that are not in the place in the prison that they should be?
I mean, the prison we talk about, they're called TAC prisoners. It's prisoners either charged under or sentenced under the Terrorism Act. And I think we lose sight of the fact that some of those are very, very serious and involve, murders and attempted bombings. But at the other end of the spectrum, there are people charged under TACT who are facing much minor charges and looking at much lower sentences. Now, that doesn't mean to say they are their sentence is commensurate with their risk. Dealing with tacked offenders, tacked prisoners, is much more complex. So I worry that Alex Chalks will say that, okay, anyone sentenced under tacked must be held at Belmarsh. Now, I think that would be a retrograde step. That embodies the problem with the prison service, which is one size fits all.
Yeah, sure, but should anyone awaiting trial on terrorism offences be allowed to work in the prison kitchen of a Category B prison?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense, because what I'm saying is that when someone is on remand, you know very little about them. So one, you only put people there that you really know and that you can trust. There are alternatives. I mean, there are 1,500 prisoners in Wandsworth, maybe a dozen working in the kitchen. So you should be able to find people who are sentenced and convicted to work in the kitchen until they're moved on.
So let's broaden this out for a second. But confession time, David. I mean, I've been doing this journalism lark for 20 years. I remember, in my first 6 months working in Westminster, talking about issues within the prison service, talking about issues within the probation service. For those who haven't been inside prison, give them just a snapshot of what it is like for the majority of what must be close to 90,000 people within the prison system at the moment.
A lot of people talk about the kind of drugs, the violence, the uncleanliness, and all those are real issues. But I think the thing which really made me furious about my time in prison was the shocking waste of human potential. So our prisons do almost nothing to help rehabilitate. And we've got to remember, almost every prisoner will be released one day. And if we had a sensible prison system, we would be investing time and energy in making sure that prisoners are on a bespoke training, education, or work plan, so that when they come to be released, they have the best chance of becoming productive, law-abiding, integrated members of society. Instead, a lot of the people in our prisons spend 23 upwards to 24 hours a day, some days, staring at the TV in their room for the length of their sentence. And what that means is any employable skills they did have just atrophy. The education they're offered is cursory at best and doesn't really do anything to give them any qualifications which have any value outside the prison system. And in many cases, out of misery, depression, they will turn to drinking hooch, to taking drugs, because it's just a way of numbing the pain and passing the time. We have a prison system, as I said, which has a huge reoffending rate, and reoffending costs us £18 billion a year. I think whatever your political stripe, you should want us to have a prison system that works, that keeps the public safe, that doesn't release people by mistake or allow people to escape, that actually reforms and rehabilitates so that those people who come out of prison have the best chance of contributing positively to society. And that it's something we can actually be proud of, and it will ultimately save taxpayers a huge amount of money.
Now, we should be locking up people we are afraid of, not who we're mad at. And people on serving terrorist sentences we're afraid of, and they should be dealt with in a high secure estate where security is the primary factor. For me, when we've talked about community prisons and we haven't really got them working, but the sort of things that most prisoners need that are coming in and out on a regular basis are the sort of things that local communities to provide, not the prison service. And that's physical and mental health care, drug and alcohol treatment, employment training, so on and so forth. So we need a prison system that caters for the dangerous people, who's dangerous and who will reduce and who will be released, but a more local estate, community prisons, where the focus is on reducing this turnover. Because, everyone's saying, oh, the problem is overcrowding. Yes, it is. There is absolutely no way on this planet that a Labour government or a Tory government are going to mass release a number of prisoners. So it's how the system itself begins to reduce the prison estate. And that is about supporting the parole system, about getting people out on license, getting people out working out such that they are prepared for release, such that we have a pre-release and a release system that's actually supporting people back into the real world and not coming back. But we need a complete rethink of the system, because there's no magic bullet on more money and less prisoners, and we've got to think a bit smarter about this.
And that's your lot for this edition of the Sky News Daily. We'll see you next time.